Okay, let's look briefly at the sit-in movements that began in the South in 1960. To understand the roots of the sit-in movement, you really have to go back to the World War II period and the formation of an organization called CORE, C-O-R-E, or Congress of Racial Equality. Established by James Farmer, CORE was the first major organization to use the sit-ins as a means to fight segregation in public places. So what's going to happen in early 1960 is with the inspiration of CORE, you're going to get a number of sit-ins throughout the South, the most famous being, of course, the Greensboro-Woolworth sit-ins. But although we focus on that sit-in as kind of the first in the South, there were actually sit-ins in many southern cities, and so we need to consider the sit-in movement as widespread, involving perhaps 70 cities, and having an enormous impact in terms of helping to integrate public facilities throughout the South. One of the major sit-ins actually occurred in Nashville, Tennessee, and shortly after the Greensboro sit-in began. Now, Nashville was a relatively progressive city, was called the Athens of the South because of its great number of educational facilities, including 4 black universities, the most important of these being Fisk. Now, this is significant because many of the black sit-in participants will come from these universities, and people like Diane Nash, for instance, will gain recognition in the civil rights movement for their role in the Nashville sit-ins. Now, what's going to happen in Nashville is that there's going to be a sit-in that begins at the Crest department store, the lunch counter at that department store, I should say. And these sit-in participants, who were African American and some whites, were trained in nonviolent tactics by an individual associated with Vanderbilt University's Divinity School. His name was James Lawson, and he's an important figure in the Nashville civil rights movement. And so these students will go into the Crest department store, the lunch counter there, and they will sit there, and they'll ask to be served. Now, they won't be served, and for about 2 weeks this situation goes on until finally an angry white mob will attack the students, and ultimately the students will be arrested by the police. They'll be charged with civil disobedience or civil disruption of the peace, I guess would be a better way to say it, and they will be fined or given the choice to go to jail. Now, a lot of these individuals will actually opt for the jail sentence as a way of making a statement. And so, and this doesn't end the sit-ins at all. In fact, they continue as one group of protesters would be forced out or would be tired, whatever the case might be, they would be replaced by others. So it was on a rotating basis that the sit-in movements were able to continue and ultimately be successful. Now, in addition to the sit-ins, Nashville's black community attempted to apply pressure on the white business community by initiating an economic boycott. And so what they did is they stopped basically buying products and services from white downtown merchants. And this did take a toll, not only because blacks were not buying from these merchants, but also whites themselves were increasingly worried and scared about going to the downtown. And so I mention this because I think we need to acknowledge the importance of economics as a factor in the success of the sit-in movements, this economic boycott, that is. The sit-in movement's also going to be affected by a bombing. What's going to happen is someone is going to bomb the home of C. Alexander Luby, who was actually a defense attorney for the sit-in protesters. And so this is going to further serve to galvanize Nashville's African American community. And so what they will do, they will organize a march to City Hall. And there they will meet the mayor of Nashville, Ben West. And what's going to happen at that meeting is something very significant. West will acknowledge that he feels that segregation of public facilities is essentially not a moral act, and And so by making that public statement, he places himself clearly on the side of the sit-in protesters. And so this is a sign for the white business community also to acknowledge that they need to integrate their facilities. And so within a few weeks you're going to see that happen in Nashville, where a lot of the public facilities are indeed integrated. So it's a significant event. One thing to note about these sit-ins, again, is that they were widespread. They weren't just in Greensboro, they weren't just in Nashville, they were probably in about 69, 70 cities throughout the South. They also had an effect on northern business, because what would happen is, say there was a sit-in at a Crest department store. Well, what would happen in the northern cities, blacks might boycott the Crest department stores in order to put pressure on the national chain to integrate, say, its lunch counters in the South. So I think that's significant to note. Another thing that's significant to note about the sit-ins is the involvement of the students, people like Diane Nash. These individuals will eventually become instrumental in the formation of a group called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Inspired partly by the leadership of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SNCC will eventually become an autonomous student-led organization, eventually, in fact, becoming tied to violence as a remedy for racial discrimination, which is indeed ironic considering the term nonviolent is in the name of the organization itself. But I think that's an important fact to note, because what it does represent is the transition in the whole black civil rights movement from a strongly nonviolent position to one by the 1960s that will be increasingly not committed to violence, but increasingly seeing violence as a tool to achieve greater black equality or greater black rights, or increased black rights. And so anyway, certainly the sit-ins are an important moment in the civil rights movement at large, and they certainly need to be considered as a success, and as an element of this whole larger struggle for African American equality during the 50s and 60s.